Welcome to Talking Politics Q&A. Robert and I are primed to answer your questions. We recorded a live stream Q&A episode on Tuesday, taking your questions after the government's astonishing climb down on welfare, which is well worth watching or listening if you haven't already. This time we've asked for questions on Labour after a year in office. So here goes. Marcus Hill, what's Labour's next embarrassing U-turn? Good question. I'll leave that one to you.
It's not so much that
changing the Chancellor, if our early episodes in the week is anything to go by.
I mean, Keir Starmer's officials have been saying she's not being sacked. We'll see, right? Yeah. There's obviously a chance that she will go in the coming weeks. But I think the issue is less around U-turns. It's more around what cabinet ministers will make of how they'll exploit the way that Downing Street and the Treasury buckled over these welfare reforms. So, for example, I don't know if you've been following this issue around how councils have struggled with the costs of funding young people with special educational needs, right? Mm-hmm. So it's a it's a huge bill, a huge rising bill for a real and important problem. We've got an education secretary who is supposedly coming up with proposals to reform the system. Until a few days ago, you'd have thought she would probably be trying to design a system with the kind of reforms that might save money. No chance of that now. I mean, if you are the education secretary and you're dealing with another class of very vulnerable people, you'll just say this is, maybe very expensive, but this is what we're going to have to spend. And it's quite difficult to see, given that they've seen what backbench MPs do when you go to them with reforms that look as though they're taking money away from vulnerable people. Very difficult to see how a chancellor or a prime minister would stand up to that. So I think that is the problem for the prime minister and the chancellor now, which is, if you are a minister looking after a vulnerable group, you broadly say, I want more money.
Yeah, and you'll get it. Now, David Armitage, if Starmer continues to lose the faith of his party and the country, could he be forced to call a general election? Well, let me have the first go at answering that. I'd say no, for two very good reasons. One, they have a very large majority. They have a large number of years before they have to call another election for give or take. And it's extremely hard to get rid of a sitting Labour leader for procedural reasons. Tory leaders are very, very easy to get rid of, which is why the Tory party has... plus, I think the Tories are more ruthless about getting rid of their leaders, in historic terms. And it's much easier to get rid of a Tory leader. It's very hard to get rid of a Labour leader. I think Keir Starmer is, of course, it's conceivable, but Keir Starmer would have to do very, very, very badly. And the only thing I would caution people about politically is 4 years is a very long time, give or take. All kinds of things can happen in that time. The Labour Party's standing in the opinion polls is historically bad, but it's not beyond the bounds of possibility that they might recover. What would you say?
They have less time than they seem to think to recover. And what I mean by that is, in order to give people a sense in the run-up to the next election that big problems have been fixed and people are better off, you've got to make some very difficult choices early. I would argue to an extent they've wasted much of the first year, and they've got
indisputably,
and they've probably got a window now of 6 months to do some very bold things. And if they don't do that, they're just gonna continue to drift.
I'm just going to take this next question in because I think I can sort of fold the two together. Gary William asks, the latest opinion polls show Reform slipping to only 2% ahead of Labour, with the Tories 10 points behind. So is talk of a Labour crisis exaggerated? I think what I would say is that we've discussed over the last couple of weeks how Labour really has blown this historic opportunity that the first year with a big majority represents. They've, come forward, they've set out a clear strategy, and then they've constantly retreated, and it's undermined their core message. As Robert was just talking there, I found myself thinking, and again, we have talked about this a fair amount, but good Lord, I long to hear Keir Starmer say something authentic. Do you know what I mean? I long to hear him stand up in the chamber and say, yeah, it's been a bit rubbish. I'm really sorry. Just to be clear, the Tories were absolutely terrible. We're an improvement on them. Reform, let's see, but that's a crazy gamble. I'm using the language that he might use. And we have far from been ideal, but, we're going to get better, and we haven't messed everything up. We've done some good things, but yeah, it's not impressive, and I'm sorry. And it's just, as we so often talk about this, but the politicians that seem to be doing well everywhere are authentic politicians, and people are just so relieved to think, oh, well, that's probably what he actually thinks. He's saying what he means. And Keir Starmer is just the antithesis. To me, I know we've probably debated this before, but I remember one of my earliest memories was going to interview Gordon Brown and him repeating the same soundbite about 10 times in an interview, and me coming back being very confused and then being told it was, Labour's communications policy. And there's a sense to me that for a lot of them, like Keir Starmer, they've never really got away from that. They think, oh, let's just stick with this. This is uncontroversial. Let's say this. And it's just more and more, I think, strikes people as inauthentic. And he, if he could just cut loose sometimes and say what he actually thinks rather than just parroting, fair or unfair?
He's a sort of, in some ways, a more normal person than we quite often get as prime minister. He's absolutely rubbish at communicating with the public, and one of the things that when you talk to people campaigning, knocking on doors for Labour, they say it is depressing for them that people, a growing number of voters just don't like him personally. And actually, I've spent a fair amount of time with him over the years. I've always found him decent. Sort of can be quite funny. I think honourable, actually. Yes, he's ruthless. Yes, he changes his position.
At that level, really.
He's more ruthless than most, in my view. But anyway, he's he's not consistent in terms of the policies. He has changed his policies, in the years that he's been a Labour politician, and particularly since he's been Labour leader, dramatically. It was quite interesting. I don't know if he's done 3 interviews with print publications in just the last few days. He did a big one with the New Statesman. He did a big one with Tom Baldwin, his biographer, in The Observer, and he did a big one in the Sunday Times. And what was striking was he did take personal responsibility for quite a lot of what's gone wrong. Okay, but I thought it was odd for what were plainly designed to be reset interviews that none of them contained any ideas for where the country should be going. There still isn't from him a strategy that everybody in the Labour Party can get behind and that the public can understand for how he's going to make this nation better. He seems to believe that if he just, does a variety of different things like, reform planning so we get some more houses built more quickly and, some infrastructure gets, some grid connections happen faster and, people's minimum wage goes up a bit. He somehow thinks that just by osmosis, people will know at the end that their lives are a bit better as a result of this government and they will thank him and the government. Well, that's just not how politics works, right? Politics works by, whether he likes it or not, he doesn't like it. He hates the vision thing. He doesn't want to be the vision politician. He thinks it's dishonest. But somebody should say to him, if you don't like the vision thing, you shouldn't be flipping leader of the country, because that is what the job requires, right? And if you can't do it, you're not doing the job. And then there's another thing that I just thought, there was another thing, funny enough, made me feel a bit sad for him in a way, which goes to, this is a slightly different flaw in what's going on. But he talked about, do you remember there was that absolute furore, I'm sure we've talked about it on this podcast, about when he announced the crackdown on immigration, he talked about
Island of Strangers.
That he didn't, that we were becoming an island of strangers, and everyone, people pointed out that this had overtones of Enoch Powell's racism, and Now he said in this interview with Baldwin that he hadn't read the speech before he gave it. That the speechwriter, actually, I talked about this on this program. I revealed that the speechwriter wrote it and didn't know that it was a Powell-like expression, right? As I said, I spoke about that on the podcast. But he then said, which I thought was...
It's a bit weird that you could be a political speechwriter and not have that kind of feel for the politics of the last, 50, 60 years. But anyway...
That's a different point. Yeah. But anyway, all right. I mean, give him the benefit of the doubt. Yeah. Apparently, just for whatever reason, it was a mistake, right? Anyway, he then said, which I totally empathised with, that the reason he had got so detached from the enormously important set of policy announcements he was about to reveal to the cameras. I was in the room, at number 11 Downing Street, in this very important, again, sort of semi-reset press conference that he was giving. The reason he sort of came to all of this cold and hadn't really given it any thought was that his house had just been firebombed, right? And his previous property had just been firebombed, and his previous car had just been firebombed, right? And I remember when all those firebombings were happening, I remember thinking, oh God, this guy loves his family, right? One of the most important things about him is he is a genuinely passionate dad and family man. And I just thought, wow, you've become Prime Minister and you're under attack, right? And, your sister-in-law is living in your house in North London. And she, it's a miracle that she was awake when the firebomb happened, because God knows, her life was plainly at risk, okay? And so I'm thinking to myself, the emotional trauma of that happening, not just for you as Prime Minister, but for your wife and your children, it's huge, right? Yeah. And he talks about this in the interview, right? So the thing that I'm just staggered by, and actually this takes us back to a conversation that we had in our previous podcast, right? Because it's relevant to all of this, is why isn't there anybody in Downing Street or in the government who is capable of saying to the Prime Minister in those circumstances, Prime Minister, you've just had the mother of all shocks. Don't do the flipping press conference. I know. Delay it, right? It can happen tomorrow. It can happen the day after. Everybody will understand, right? Yeah. But no, they're also bloody repressed, and he does this stiff upper lip thing and just gets on with it. It's mad.
Got a couple more questions. Let's take them quickly. Campbell Finney says, why have we seen a rebellion within Labour about welfare reforms, but nothing when it comes to the genocide in Gaza? I think what I did have something to say about that, which I don't think will be very popular. One of the things I've noticed as a kind of modern trend is the need to apply judgments, moral judgments, to so many things and situations. And I guess all I would say, and particularly I would say to people, is it's possible to have two ideas in your head at the same time. It's possible to think that October the 7th was a horrendous thing, that it was an insane thing for Hamas to do, even in practical terms for them politically, for the people of Gaza. It was absolutely horrific for the victims and for the people of Israel. It was a terrible thing. And all the rest of it, but equally to find the way that Israel has prosecuted the war in Gaza, horrific, potentially breaching international law on occasions, potentially on many occasions. It's possible to feel equally strongly about both those things, and to conclude that really the answer is, despite all the many failed attempts in the past to try and find some kind of solution. And I don't think it's wrong for a British government to be wanting to do that. Agree or disagree? Fair or unfair?
Sorry, wanting to do what?
Well, just in terms of people tend to want the British government to jump always to stances. The thing I've always thought about the Middle East is there are many wrongs on all sides. I guess what I've said. And sure, there are many people who think more wrong is more on one side than the other, and that is the source of endless debate. But I think certainly from the point of view of say, the British government, rather than getting into arguing about the wrongs or who's done the most wrong, trying to get to some kind of right, which would be some kind of solution, doesn't seem an unreasonable position.
Well, look, I'm going to answer the question slightly differently from Campbell. The reason we've seen a rebellion within Labour about welfare is because it is something that they can directly change.
Yes.
Whereas, this government has increasingly become critical of Israel when it comes to the, appalling killing of civilians in Gaza.
There are people say I see that, but then people say, yeah, but you're still providing arms, you're still providing support, all the rest of it. And
but just to be clear, we have, as a country, the government has become way more critical of the Israeli government, whether it comes to the appalling behaviour of the settlers in the occupied territories, whether it's it's just shocking blocking of the UN's food distribution and the imposition of this weird Israeli-American organisation which has been associated with staggering numbers of killings of Palestinian civilians. The British government has been increasingly critical of all of that. It hasn't stopped all supplies of military equipment to Israel, but most. Not that, frankly, Britain never supplied very much at all anyway. So its position has become more critical. It has put sanctions on Israeli politicians. So, but broadly, common sense point is that, as I say, Labour MPs, they can get angry with the government for not doing more, but they can't change. Britain can't change. There's the only individual in the entire world who we think can really have any kind of an influence on Netanyahu's government, and even then, his influence appears to be limited, and he himself gets frustrated, is Trump, right? So I don't know. Let's be clear. Labour MPs torture themselves about what's going on in the Middle East, but there's a limit to what they can do.
Fair enough. That seems actually a good place to end. Please do keep sending your questions to talkingpolitics@itv.com or reply to any of our social posts. Until next time, from Robert and from me, goodbye.
Goodbye.